Und noch immer suchen 15 Ermittler nach dem Kind.
Wo ist Inga?
Also bislang haben wir noch keine Anhaltspunkte zu den Verbindungen zum Fall Inga.
On May 2, 2015, in a small, secluded village in Germany, a 5-year-old girl disappeared along a path just 100 meters long. No screams, no traces, no witnesses. Over 1,000 people, helicopters, and search dogs scoured thousands of hectares of forest. Yet Inga Gehricke seemed to vanish into thin air. 10 years have passed, and the case remains one of Germany's greatest mysteries, often called the Madeleine McCann of Germany. But what really happened to Inga? The disappearance of 5-year-old Inga Gehricke on May 2, 2015, is one of the most baffling and haunting cases in modern German history. It took place in Wilhelmshof, a secluded facility run by the Christian social welfare organization Diakonie, located near Stendal in the state of Saxony-Anhalt. This was not an ordinary village. Wilhelmshof was a specialized residential community designed for the care and treatment of people with intellectual disabilities, individuals struggling with chronic addictions, and those living with severe mental health conditions. It occupied approximately 3,500 hectares, a mix of open green spaces, gardens, and dense forest, creating both an atmosphere of tranquility and an environment that could conceal many secrets. Wilhelmshof operated in a unique rhythm. There were no visible clocks or a rigid adherence to precise schedules. Life was guided by the ringing of bells, one for meal times, another for communal prayers, and others for scheduled events. Residents and staff moved through their days according to these auditory signals, rather than specific times on a watch. Outsiders could not freely enter the grounds without permission, making the facility relatively secure from the outside world. However, it was home to a complex mix of people, including some with criminal pasts or histories of violence who were receiving treatment and, in some cases, permitted to move about freely within the premises. On the first Saturday of May in 2015, the Gehricke family, parents Victoria and Jens Yu, and their children were visiting Wilhelmshof to spend the weekend with friends who lived and worked there. The visit coincided with warm spring weather, and the adults decided to hold a barbecue as a final gathering before the family returned home. The barbecue area was situated near the edge of the forest, a short distance from the main residential buildings. The children, enjoying the open space and the company of playmates, roamed freely within the grounds, playing games and occasionally helping the adults with preparations. In the early evening, as the barbecue preparations were underway, Inga was given a simple errand: to carry 2 bottles of water from the house to the barbecue site. The distance was roughly 100 meters, a route familiar to her and considered entirely safe. She set off, presumably to complete the task quickly. Yet, somewhere along that short path, a walk of less than 1 minute, she vanished without a trace. There were no cries for help, no commotion, and no one saw her deviate from the route. At first, no one suspected anything alarming. In an environment perceived as safe and sheltered, it seemed plausible that Inga had simply been delayed or distracted, perhaps stopping to play with other children or investigate something along the way. But as the minutes passed, her absence grew more conspicuous. By approximately 6:40 to 7 p.m., the family's initial calm had shifted into panic. They began searching the immediate area, calling her name repeatedly. When no response came, their fear escalated. The police were contacted promptly. What followed was one of the largest search operations the region had ever seen. More than 1,000 people participated in the effort, including police officers, firefighters, rescue workers, and civilian volunteers. The search extended across the entirety of Wilhelmshof's grounds and into the surrounding forest, eventually covering an area of approximately 700 hectares. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging technology swept over the dense woodland and open fields, scanning for signs of body heat that might indicate the presence of a lost child. On the ground, specialized tracking dogs were brought in to follow her scent. One set of dogs reportedly traced a scent trail leading toward a nearby highway, but the trail abruptly ended there, offering no clear indication of what had happened next. No clothing, personal items, or physical evidence were recovered to explain her disappearance. The complete lack of tangible leads stunned both searchers and the public. In a matter of seconds, Inga seemed to have been swallowed by the earth. The sheer speed and silence of her disappearance invited comparisons to other high-profile missing children's cases, most notably the 2007 disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann in Portugal. Like Madeleine, Inga was young, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed, and she vanished while on a family holiday under circumstances that defied straightforward explanation. In the media, she began to be referred to as Germany's Madeleine McCann. The psychological toll on the Gehricke family was immense. For the parents, the shift from a day of warmth and joy to a night of frantic searching and unbearable uncertainty was shattering. In the days that followed, hope was interwoven with anguish as the possibility of finding her alive diminished with each passing hour. That hope was fueled by the massive scale of the search and the determination of those involved. But it was also fragile, sustained only by the absence of definitive evidence that she had come to harm. The community, too, felt the weight of the tragedy. Wilhelmshof's residents and staff, accustomed to the routines and relative calm of their isolated environment, were confronted with the stark reality that such an incident could occur even in their midst. Beyond the local level, the case gripped the German public. Media coverage was extensive, and the mystery of how a child could vanish so quickly in a contained area sparked widespread anxiety and speculation. The case also exposed the challenges authorities face in responding to disappearances in such environments. The isolation of Wilhelmshof meant that any potential abductor would likely need to have been on the grounds already or have had knowledge of the area. The lack of conventional timekeeping among residents made establishing a precise timeline more difficult, and the mixed population, including individuals with mental illness or criminal backgrounds, complicated the process of gathering reliable witness statements. For law enforcement, the failure to find any conclusive evidence, despite deploying advanced search techniques and significant manpower, was deeply frustrating. It highlighted the limits of even the most coordinated operations when confronted with a disappearance that offers no physical clues. Inga's case became a sobering reminder that despite advances in technology and investigative methods, there are still circumstances under which a person, even a small child, can disappear without a trace. Over time, the case remained unsolved, and its legacy has been one of unanswered questions and lingering pain. For the Gehricke family, each anniversary brought renewed public attention and fresh waves of grief. For the German public, the case stood as both a personal tragedy and a symbol of the enduring mystery that sometimes surrounds missing persons investigations. The comparisons to Madeleine McCann persisted not just because of the similarities in the children's appearances and ages, but because both cases underscored the same haunting truth that sometimes, even in the presence of loved ones, in places thought to be safe, children can vanish, and the world is left without answers. One of the earliest theories considered by investigators in the disappearance of Inga Gehricke was that she may have simply wandered away from the barbecue gathering, become disoriented, and gotten lost in the vast forest surrounding Wilhelmshof. At first glance, this theory seemed plausible. Wilhelmshof and its neighboring lands encompass thousands of hectares of mixed-terrain open fields, thick woodland, dense undergrowth, and winding paths that could easily confuse even an adult unfamiliar with the area. For a 5-year-old child, such an environment could quickly turn from an inviting play space into a disorienting and dangerous maze. The lost child theory gained traction in the initial hours after Inga vanished because it fit a common pattern in missing children cases in rural areas. There was no immediate evidence of an abduction, no witnesses saw a stranger on the grounds, no signs of a struggle, and no vehicle speeding away. Given that Inga had last been seen walking a short and familiar route, carrying 2 bottles of water from the house to the barbecue site, investigators considered whether she might have deviated from that route, perhaps chasing after something that caught her eye, or taking a wrong turn that led her away from the safe, populated area and into the woods. Adding weight to this theory was a witness statement from a local hunter. In the early hours of the morning following Inga's disappearance, at around 4 a.m., the man was sitting in a raised hunting stand in the forest near Wilhelmshof. He reported hearing a sound that deeply unsettled him, the cries of what he believed to be a young child calling, "Papa," repeatedly. According to the hunter, the cries were faint but distinct, carrying through the stillness of the pre-dawn forest. At that time, news of Inga's disappearance had not yet been made public, meaning it was unlikely the man's account was influenced by media reports. To him, the sound was unmistakably human and filled with distress. This detail, if accurate, painted a heartbreaking possibility that Inga had survived the night, alone and frightened, calling out for her father in a forest too vast for searchers to pinpoint her location. It suggested she might have been injured or too disoriented to find her way back, huddling somewhere beyond the reach of the search teams who were scouring other parts of the area. However, the police response to the hunter's report was measured. Search teams investigated the area he indicated but found nothing. Some officials speculated that the sound could have been made by an animal, perhaps a fox or deer, whose calls can sometimes resemble human cries to an untrained ear. Others argued that the hunter, though experienced, could still have misinterpreted what he heard. With no physical evidence to support his account, the lead eventually went cold. From a practical standpoint, the idea of a 5-year-old surviving alone in the forest for any significant length of time presents serious challenges. Young children lack the navigational skills, physical stamina, and situational awareness necessary to move safely through uneven, densely vegetated terrain. Scientific assessments of survival probabilities for children in such environments show steep declines after the first 24 to 48 hours, especially in regions where nighttime temperatures drop and food and water are scarce. Inga disappeared in early May, when daytime conditions were mild, but nighttime temperatures could still fall low enough to cause hypothermia in a child. Without shelter, warm clothing, or knowledge of how to find safe water sources, her chances of survival would have diminished rapidly. Furthermore, a child of her age would be especially vulnerable to panic and exhaustion. Panic can cause a lost person to make erratic choices, such as walking in circles or moving deeper into unfamiliar areas rather than staying put. Survival experts often note that children may behave unpredictably when lost. While adults tend to seek open areas or follow terrain features like streams in hopes of finding help, children sometimes hide from searchers, crawl into tight spaces, or remain completely still out of fear. Such behavior can make them exceptionally difficult to locate, even for trained rescue teams. Despite these challenges, large-scale searches for lost children in forested environments typically yield some trace of the person's footprints, dropped belongings, broken branches, or disturbed vegetation. In Inga's case, no such evidence was ever found. The search for her was one of the largest in the region's history, involving over 1,000 participants. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras, and highly trained search and rescue dogs. The dogs detected a scent trail leading toward a nearby highway, but nothing indicating she had spent time wandering deep in the woods. This absence of evidence is the strongest argument against the "lost in the forest" theory. With so many resources deployed in the critical early hours and days, it is difficult to imagine that a living child, or even her remains, could have gone unnoticed in the search zones. Thermal imaging cameras are capable of detecting small heat signatures at considerable distances, and the scent tracking abilities of trained dogs are formidable in the first hours after a disappearance. For a child to evade all these detection methods strains the boundaries of probability. Still, proponents of the theory caution against dismissing it entirely. The forest surrounding Wilhelmshof is expansive and complex, with numerous natural obstacles that could have hindered search efforts. Dense underbrush, uneven ground, fallen trees, and hidden ravines can easily conceal a small person from both aerial and ground searchers. It is also possible that Inga wandered beyond the initially designated search perimeter before the search began, placing her outside the range of the most intensive efforts. Moreover, even the most advanced search methods are not infallible. Thermal imaging can be affected by environmental factors such as dense foliage, which can obscure heat signatures. Scent trails can degrade quickly due to wind, rain, or the passage of time, making it harder for dogs to maintain a lead. And human error in organizing search grids, interpreting evidence, or prioritizing areas can leave critical zones underexamined. In this light, the absence of physical evidence, while highly significant, does not absolutely rule out the possibility that Inga became lost. Her disappearance remains so deeply mysterious precisely because it defies the usual patterns and outcomes. In most lost child cases in wooded areas, searchers eventually find the child alive, or they find some indication of where the child traveled. Inga's case offers neither. The lost in the forest hypothesis is both the simplest and, paradoxically, one of the hardest to reconcile with the facts. On one hand, it requires no involvement from an outside perpetrator and fits the timeline of her last known movements. On the other hand, the extraordinary scope and intensity of the search, combined with the total lack of physical traces, make it difficult for many to accept as the sole explanation. For some, the hunter's account of hearing a child's cries remains the most haunting element of this theory, a tantalizing, heartbreaking clue that might point to Inga's final moments in the forest. For others, it is an uncertain detail that, without corroboration, can only remain part of an unresolved question. What is clear is that if Inga did become lost in the woods that evening, she did so in a way that has left no mark upon the landscape, no artifact for investigators to follow. In a world where even the most remote regions are rarely beyond the reach of human detection, her absence remains a profound and unsettling mystery. From the very beginning of the investigation into the disappearance of 5-year-old Inga Gehricke, the unique environment of Wilhelmshof shaped both the scope of the search and the nature of the theories surrounding what might have happened. While much of the initial public speculation centered on the possibility that she had wandered into the surrounding forest, there was another line of inquiry that investigators could not ignore: that the perpetrator, if there was one, might not have been an outsider at all, but someone from within the community itself. Wilhelmshof was not a typical residential neighborhood or an open park where families from the surrounding towns could come and go freely. It was a self-contained community operated by the Diakony Social Welfare Organization, and its residents represented a particularly complex mix of individuals. Among them were people struggling with chronic substance addictions, individuals living with severe mental illnesses, and a small number of residents or patients with criminal records, including convictions for violent or offenses. Many were there for rehabilitation or under court-mandated supervision, and some were also from nearby forensic psychiatric facilities. Because of the nature of the institution, Wilhelmshof had restricted access. Entry and exit points were few, and in theory, anyone unfamiliar to the staff or residents would be noticed. This meant that if Inga had been abducted, the likelihood of a stranger arriving undetected, committing the crime, and leaving without being seen was low. In fact, the geography and security of the site almost demanded that any potential perpetrator would have to have already been on the premises as a resident, a patient, an employee, or a visitor with legitimate access. An insider would have had several key advantages. They would know the layout of the grounds, the wooded areas, the secluded corners, and the routes that could be taken without drawing attention. They might also have been able to anticipate where the children were playing, when they might be briefly unsupervised, and how long it would take for anyone to notice a child missing. In an environment where residents and staff were accustomed to moving about without constant scrutiny, a familiar face walking with a child might not have raised immediate suspicion. The theory of an insider abduction also accounted for the speed and silence of Inga's disappearance. She was last seen walking a short, familiar path with a clear destination. If she had encountered a trusted figure, perhaps someone she had met during the visit, a friendly resident, or a staff member, she might have felt no reason to resist. In this scenario, there would be no struggle, no cries for help, and no reason for anyone nearby to suspect wrongdoing until it was too late. However, investigating this possibility presented enormous challenges for law enforcement. The very composition of the Wilhelmshof community complicated matters. Many residents had mental health conditions or cognitive impairments that affected memory, perception, and communication. Some were unable to give clear timelines of where they had been or who they had seen, particularly in a setting without clocks or conventional time markers. The daily schedule was dictated by bells signaling meals and activities, not by precise hours, so residents often could not recall whether an event had occurred at, say, 6:30 p.m. or 7 p.m. This absence of precise timekeeping meant that constructing an accurate, minute-by-minute timeline of the afternoon and evening of May 2015 was nearly impossible. Investigators found themselves working with vague or contradictory statements. One person might say they saw Inga with someone before dinner. Another might claim to have seen her after we had coffee. But without synchronized reference points, these observations could not be reliably placed in order. Furthermore, the psychological and social dynamics within such a community may have fostered reluctance to cooperate fully with investigators. Some residents may have feared being wrongly accused or stigmatized. Others may have been wary of law enforcement in general, especially if they had prior negative experiences with police or the criminal justice system. There was also the possibility of protective behavior, consciously or unconsciously shielding someone they knew from suspicion, even if that person had a troubling history. Compounding these difficulties was the fact that in a therapeutic or rehabilitative environment like Wilhelmshof, staff often aim to protect residents' privacy and dignity. While this is ethically important in normal circumstances, it can create friction when a criminal investigation requires extensive questioning, searches of personal spaces, and the review of sensitive records. Even with full legal authority, investigators had to navigate a delicate balance between urgency and the need to avoid disrupting the therapeutic environment. The result was that identifying and interviewing potential witnesses and assessing the reliability of their accounts became a painstaking process. Many of the people present on the grounds at the time of Inga's disappearance could not offer definitive information about their own movements, much less those of others. Forensic timelines, so critical in narrowing down suspects in most abduction cases, remained frustratingly blurred. This lack of clarity at the earliest stage of the investigation had a direct impact on its overall quality. In missing child cases, the first hours are often decisive. The inability to pinpoint who had access to which areas at specific times, or to verify alibis against a coherent timeline, meant that leads could not be prioritized with confidence. Potential suspects may have slipped through the cracks simply because there was no reliable way to confirm or refute their presence at key locations. Moreover, the insular nature of Wilhelmshof meant that information flowed in ways unfamiliar to traditional police work. Rumors, misremembered details, and assumptions could easily take root, shaping both the perceptions of the community and the direction of the investigation. When people with varying cognitive abilities tried to recall events, subtle inaccuracies could snowball into misleading narratives. Investigators had to sort through this tangled web of partial truths, distortions, and genuine misunderstandings. The challenge was exacerbated by the fact that Wilhelmshof's very isolation limited the pool of potential witnesses from outside the community. In a more open environment, a public park, a residential street, there might be passersby, surveillance cameras, or neighbors who could provide independent observations. In this closed environment, nearly every potential witness was somehow connected to the community itself, with all the attendant complications. While the insider abduction theory could not be proven, it remained difficult to dismiss entirely. The restricted access to Wilhelmshof combined with the absence of evidence pointing to an external perpetrator, kept it in consideration. The idea that someone familiar with the grounds could have acted quickly and discreetly aligned with the circumstances, a child vanishing within less than a minute's walk, leaving no trace, in a place where strangers would be obvious but insiders would blend in. Yet pursuing this theory to its logical conclusion meant confronting unsettling questions. If the abductor was indeed someone within the community, where could they have taken Inga without being seen? Could they have removed her from the premises entirely? And if so, how did they avoid detection at the facility's limited exit points? Or was it possible that whatever happened to her occurred within Wilhelmshof itself, in a location that was overlooked or inaccessible during the initial searches? These questions underscored a grim reality. The very characteristics that made Wilhelmshof a place of safety and rehabilitation also made it an extraordinarily difficult environment in which to investigate a crime. The blend of restricted access, complex social dynamics, and unconventional timekeeping meant that from the moment Inga disappeared, the investigation faced obstacles that could not be easily overcome. In the years since, some critics have argued that the initial inquiry was hampered by an over-reliance on the cooperation of residents and staff who, for various reasons, may not have been able or willing to provide accurate accounts. Others point out that without a clear and consistent timeline, even the most thorough police work would struggle to establish the chain of events. Whether or not an insider was responsible, the limitations imposed by the unique setting of Wilhelmshof undeniably shaped the investigation and may have obscured the truth about what happened to Inga Gehricke that spring evening. Among the many theories surrounding the disappearance of 5-year-old Inga Gehricke, one of the most disturbing is the possibility that she was targeted by an organized criminal network, a group involved in human trafficking or the illicit sale of children. This hypothesis draws on patterns observed in certain international missing children cases, where a child vanishes without a trace, and later evidence suggests they may have been moved far beyond the original search area, sometimes across national borders. The idea is chilling but not unprecedented. In Europe and beyond, there are documented cases of children abducted and then transported to other countries through sophisticated networks. These networks often operate with alarming efficiency, using safe houses, forged documents, and covert transportation methods to evade detection. In some cases, the children are sold into illegal adoption arrangements, exploited for forced labor, or subjected to exploitation. Inga's disappearance shares some characteristics with such cases. She vanished in an extraordinarily short time frame, in a location where access for outsiders was limited. If an abductor had planned in advance, the controlled environment of Wilhelmshof could have been both a challenge and an advantage, a challenge in terms of gaining entry without drawing suspicion, but an advantage in that once inside, there would be fewer witnesses than in a public space. A well-prepared offender might have had a vehicle ready outside the main grounds and a predetermined route out of the area, minimizing the window in which authorities could intervene. The possibility that Inga could have been removed not just from Wilhelmshof, but from the region, or even the country, cannot be dismissed outright. Germany is centrally located in Europe, with extensive road networks and relatively open borders within the Schengen zone. If an abduction was coordinated, the child could, in theory, be in another country within hours. This is a known tactic in international trafficking cases, as moving a victim quickly out of the jurisdiction where they were taken complicates investigative efforts and can hinder cooperation between different law enforcement agencies. However, Inga's age and characteristics present significant logistical challenges to this theory. At 5 years old, she was no longer an infant. Unlike a newborn or toddler, she would have been capable of speaking, possibly resisting, and certainly remembering her family and native language. This makes integration into a new environment more difficult for both the child and the abductors. It also increases the risk of discovery, since a 5-year-old might attempt to seek help or draw attention, if given the chance. Physically, she had distinctive features: blonde hair, blue eyes, and a small gap from missing baby teeth which, while perhaps not unusual in parts of Europe, were specific enough that matching her description to missing persons alerts would be possible. These factors mean that, if she were taken for the purpose of illegal adoption, the abductors would have needed a highly controlled setting for her, perhaps one in which she had minimal contact with outsiders, until she could be taught to conceal her identity. In cases where children have been trafficked for exploitation rather than adoption, the logistics and dangers are even more grim, as such environments are often abusive and transient, reducing the chance of a victim remaining in one place long enough for detection. Some potential clues have been cited in support of the trafficking theory. One is the reported scent trail detected by search dogs leading from Wilhelmshof toward a nearby highway before abruptly ending. This could be consistent with a vehicle pickup point. Another is a claimed sighting in Berlin, where a woman reported seeing a distressed young girl matching Inga's description being pulled along by a disheveled man with no shoes. The girl, she said, looked unhappy and was being led away against her will. Berlin is a major transportation hub with connections to other European cities, so if this sighting was accurate, it could indicate the first leg of a longer journey. But these pieces of information are far from conclusive. Scent trails can be affected by environmental factors and may not definitively prove a child's path. The Berlin sighting was not corroborated by physical evidence or other witnesses, and the description, while similar to Inga, could also fit many other children. Without photographic confirmation or forensic evidence, these remain tantalizing but unverified leads. There is also the broader statistical context to consider. While organized trafficking does occur, the vast majority of child disappearances, particularly in developed countries, are not the result of sophisticated criminal networks, but rather involve family disputes, accidental deaths, or opportunistic local offenders. Inga's case does not fit neatly into any one category, which is part of what makes it so perplexing. German police have not excluded the trafficking hypothesis, but they have also stated that there is no direct, concrete evidence to substantiate it. This is an important distinction in the absence of clear proof. Law enforcement cannot prioritize one theory over another without risking the neglect of other, potentially more likely avenues of inquiry. Investigators must allocate resources based on leads, and in this case, no lead has definitively pointed to an organized network. Still, the nature of Inga's disappearance, rapid, silent, and leaving no trace, means that trafficking cannot be dismissed outright. It remains in the investigative background as a possibility, albeit one with significant obstacles to plausibility given the child's age and the secure setting from which she vanished. The police's position reflects a careful balance, acknowledging the theory to keep the public alert to any signs of cross-border movement, while also recognizing the limits of the evidence. For the Gehricke family, the thought of Inga being alive somewhere, even under such dire circumstances, is both a source of fragile hope and unbearable anguish. If she were trafficked, there remains a theoretical chance of rescue, as has occurred in rare cases years after an abduction. But the lack of solid leads in the decades since her disappearance has made such a possibility increasingly remote. Ultimately, the trafficking theory underscores the international dimension that a case like Inga's can potentially take on. It draws attention to the importance of cross-border cooperation, rapid information sharing, and vigilance in monitoring for children who may have been displaced far from where they were taken. It also highlights the sobering reality that in some disappearances, the absence of evidence does not necessarily mean the absence of a crime. When examining the disappearance of Inga Gehricke, one name inevitably surfaces in discussions of potential suspects: Christian Bruckner, widely known as Christian B. in European media. Christian B. is most infamous for being the prime suspect in another of Europe's most high-profile missing children cases, the disappearance of 3-year-old Madeleine McCann from a holiday apartment in Praia da Luz, Portugal, in 2007. Over the years, his extensive criminal history, mobility across Europe, and proximity to key events have placed him under a cloud of suspicion. Not only in the McCann case but also in Inga's. Christian B's criminal biography reads like a catalogue of predatory behavior and escalating violence. Born in Würzburg, Germany, in 1976, he spent part of his youth in foster care and youth institutions. By the age of 17, he had already been convicted of offender, receiving a 2-year suspended sentence. This early offense was not an isolated incident. Instead, it marked the beginning of a decades-long criminal career that would span multiple countries. In the late 1990s, after facing fresh charges in Germany, Christian B relocated to Portugal. There, he lived in and around the Algarve region, moving frequently and living in various accommodations, including rented apartments, camper vans, and makeshift arrangements. He was known to drift between legitimate employment, such as catering, and illegal activities, notably stimulant trafficking and burglary. In September 2005, he committed one of his most brutal crimes, the invasion of a 72-year-old American woman in her home in Praia da Luz. The attack was violent, and although the victim reported the assault immediately, Christian B evaded justice for over a decade. He was finally convicted in 2019, years after DNA evidence linked him to the crime. By the mid-2010s, Christian B had returned to Germany periodically, moving between the country and southern Europe. He was still active in criminal circles and had not severed ties with individuals in various parts of the continent. His name emerged in the Inga Gehricke investigation due to a combination of geography, timing, and disturbing circumstantial evidence. The key point of interest is his documented presence in the general vicinity of Wilhelmshof around the time of Inga's disappearance on May 2, 2015. Just one day before Inga vanished, Christian B was involved in a minor car accident approximately 90 kilometers from Wilhelmshof. The incident occurred in a parking lot near a service station, and police were called to the scene. Although the collision itself was relatively inconsequential, it placed Christian B in northern Germany within a day's travel of Wilhelmshof, a fact investigators could not ignore. Even more unsettling was what police later found during searches of a property linked to him. This property, an abandoned box factory located in Neuwigersleben, also in Saxony-Anhalt, was reportedly under Christian B's control. When investigators entered the site, they discovered a trove of illicit and deeply troubling material, thousands of images and videos containing child invasion material, stored on various media including hard drives, CDs, and USB sticks. While none of the material was confirmed to depict Inga, the sheer volume and nature of the content painted a damning portrait of the suspect's proclivities. In addition to the digital evidence, police also found items of children's clothing, including swimwear and underwear, that could not be linked to any known child in Christian B's life. These items raised urgent questions. Were they trophies taken from victims, or innocuous objects left behind from unrelated sources? Forensic testing reportedly failed to connect them definitively to Inga, but their presence in the possession of a convicted predator with a history of targeting children was alarming. The suspicion deepened when investigators examined Christian B's alibi for May 2, 2015. According to police, he could not provide a verifiable account of his whereabouts during the time frame when Inga disappeared. This absence of an alibi was compounded by mobile phone records placing a device associated with him in the vicinity of Wilhelmshof on the day in question. While cell tower data is not precise enough to pinpoint exact locations, the records were close enough geographically to suggest he could have been within striking distance of the Diakoni facility. Adding another layer to the intrigue were rumors and investigative leads suggesting that Christian B may have had some form of contact or indirect access to individuals within a nearby forensic psychiatric facility. Located only a few kilometers from Wilhelmshof, this institution housed offenders who were undergoing psychiatric treatment. Some residents had limited supervised freedom of movement. It has been speculated, though never proven, that information about Inga's presence at Wilhelmshof could have been relayed to an outsider like Christian B. through casual conversations or other informal channels. Such a link would explain how an itinerant criminal, without ties to Wilhelmshof, might have known there were children on the premises that day. The police reaction to Christian B. as a suspect in the Inga case has been cautious but consistent. While acknowledging his history and the suspicious timing of his proximity to Wilhelmshof, investigators have also stressed that they lack direct evidence connecting him to Inga's disappearance. In criminal investigations, particularly those involving suspects with prolific criminal pasts, circumstantial evidence must be weighed carefully to avoid wrongful implication. In this instance, the evidence, while troubling, remains indirect. No forensic traces of Inga have been found in Christian B's possession, vehicles, or properties. No credible witness has placed him at Wilhelmshof on the day she vanished. For Inga's family, however, the suspicion surrounding Christian B is impossible to ignore. The parallels between his known criminal behavior and the circumstances of Inga's disappearance are too strong for them to dismiss. Victoria Gehricke, Inga's mother, has publicly expressed her frustration at what she perceives as a lack of urgency in pursuing this lead. She has called for the case to be re-examined with a focus on Christian B, arguing that his presence in the region, his inability to account for his movements, and the incriminating materials found in his possession warrant far more intensive scrutiny. The comparison to Madeleine McCann's case only amplifies these concerns. In both instances, a young blonde child vanished in a short window of opportunity, and in both cases, Christian B was in the area at the time. In the McCann investigation, Portuguese and German prosecutors have gone so far as to publicly identify him as the prime suspect. Although formal charges have yet to be brought, the overlap between the two cases creates a disturbing portrait of a man who, if guilty in either instance, has exploited moments of vulnerability in seemingly safe settings to commit horrific acts. Despite the lack of direct proof, the Christian B hypothesis remains one of the most prominent in the Inga Gehricke investigation. It encapsulates the central tension in the case, the balance between suspicion grounded in compelling circumstantial evidence and the necessity of building a prosecutable case. For now, the file remains open, with Christian B's name still among those of interest to investigators. The possibility that he holds the key to solving the mystery of Inga's disappearance, whether in the form of direct involvement or knowledge of what happened, remains a haunting question for both her family and the public at large. Despite the massive scale of the search for 5-year-old Inga Gehricke, the case has been plagued by a conspicuous absence of conclusive physical evidence. Still, over the course of the investigation, several leads emerged, some from specialized search operations, others from eyewitness accounts, and others from forensic examinations of properties linked to potential suspects. Each offered a glimmer of hope, yet each also came with limitations that have made it impossible to establish a definitive narrative of what happened to Inga on May 2, 2015. One of the earliest and most technically significant efforts to track Inga's movements came through the deployment of specially trained search dogs. These dogs, brought in within hours of the disappearance, were tasked with picking up her scent from the last known location. Working across the wooded and grassy terrain of Wilhelmshof, the dogs reportedly managed to follow a trail that led out of the immediate grounds and toward a nearby highway. The trail, however, ended abruptly at or near the roadside. For investigators, this was a potentially critical finding. A scent trail ending at a road could suggest that Inga was picked up by a vehicle. Yet, as with all dog-assisted tracking, the interpretation of such results is not straightforward. Scent trails can be influenced by wind, weather, ground composition, and contamination from other human traffic. In this case, while the direction toward the highway was clear enough to be noted in official accounts, there was no corroborating evidence such as tire tracks, discarded items, or surveillance footage to confirm a vehicle's presence at the relevant time. Without that supporting evidence, the significance of the scent trail remains suggestive but inconclusive. The possibility that Inga left Wilhelmshof in a vehicle was indirectly echoed in another lead, a reported sighting in Berlin, more than 150 kilometers from where she disappeared. A woman came forward to say that she had seen a young girl matching Inga's description in the city's public transport system. The girl, she claimed, was accompanied by a disheveled man who appeared to be pulling her along roughly. Strikingly, the man was not wearing shoes, and the girl looked distressed. The witness's impression was strong enough for her to remember the encounter and later report it after seeing news of Inga's disappearance. While potentially significant, the Berlin sighting suffers from the same problem as many eyewitness reports, the absence of physical verification. There is no known CCTV footage of the encounter. No other passengers have corroborated the account, and the description, though fitting Inga's general age and appearance, could also match many other children. Furthermore, the timing of the sighting relative to her disappearance was not precise enough to establish a clear connection. As a result, while investigators documented the report, it remains in the category of unconfirmed leads. Another piece of anecdotal evidence came from a local hunter who provided one of the most haunting accounts in the case. In the early hours of the morning following Inga's disappearance, around 4 a.m., he was in a raised hunting stand in the forest near Wilhelmshof. In the stillness before dawn, he heard what he believed to be the cries of a young child calling out, "Papa," repeatedly. The sound, he said, was faint but distinctly human, carrying through the quiet forest. Importantly, at that point in time, the news of Inga's disappearance had not yet reached the public, which lends some credibility to the hunter's account. However, follow-up searches in the area indicated by the hunter yielded no results. Some police officials suggested that the sound might have been an animal call. Certain species, such as foxes, can produce noises that resemble human cries. The hunter, experienced in the local wildlife, stood by his account, but without physical evidence to corroborate it. The lead eventually went cold. Nonetheless, for some observers, this testimony remains one of the most emotionally compelling possibilities, that Inga was alive alone and calling for her father in the hours after she vanished. Physical evidence gathered later in the investigation centered on properties connected to Christian B., the convicted offender and suspect in multiple missing child cases. In 2016, authorities searched an abandoned box factory in Neuwiggersleben, Saxony-Anhalt, reportedly under his control. Inside, they discovered thousands of files containing child material stored on hard drives, CDs, and USB sticks. None of the material was confirmed to depict Inga, but its sheer volume and nature reinforced the perception of Christian B. as a high-risk individual. Alongside the digital material, investigators also found children's clothing, including swimsuits and underwear. These items could not be traced to any known children associated with Christian B., raising unsettling questions about their origin. Forensic testing did not link the clothing to Inga, and without DNA or other identifiers, their evidentiary value remained limited. Still, their presence in the possession of a man with his criminal history kept them in the investigative record as potentially relevant. The overall state of the case file reflects the fragmented and often frustrating nature of these leads. Each the dog's scent trail to the highway, the Berlin sighting, the hunter's testimony, the evidence from Christian B.'s property offers a potential piece of the puzzle, yet none fits neatly into a confirmed sequence of events. The lack of hard forensic evidence, such as DNA, fingerprints, or items unquestionably belonging to Inga, has hampered efforts to move beyond speculation. There are also procedural limitations to consider. Some of the evidence, particularly witness statements, was collected after significant time delays, which can affect memory accuracy. The scent trail findings, while recorded early, were never backed by physical scene preservation or immediate forensic follow-up at the highway location. The Berlin sighting could not be supported with transport system video due to either lack of coverage at the time or the lapse in retrieving it quickly enough. Evaluating the reliability of each lead involves weighing not just the plausibility of the account, but also the potential for error. Search dogs, while highly trained, can produce false positives or be inadvertently influenced by handlers. Eyewitnesses can misinterpret what they see, especially in fleeting encounters. Auditory perceptions, like the hunter's papa, cries, are particularly prone to ambiguity in outdoor environments. And physical evidence, such as the materials from Christian B's property, loses probative strength without direct forensic linkage to the victim. Taken together, the leads paint a picture of a case where tantalizing clues exist, but are disconnected. There is a possible vehicle pickup suggested by the scent trail, a possible urban sighting suggesting relocation, an auditory clue hinting at survival in the forest, and incriminating but circumstantially unrelated items tied to a known offender. Each, in isolation, could form part of a viable narrative. In combination, their inconsistencies and gaps have prevented a cohesive theory from emerging that can stand up in court. For the investigators, the challenge lies in keeping these disparate threads active without overcommitting to one at the expense of others. For Inga's family, the existence of these clues is both a source of hope and of deep frustration, hope that the truth may still be out there in one of these fragments, and frustration that none has yet been the breakthrough they have waited for since that spring evening in 2015. The investigation into the disappearance of 5-year-old Inga Gehricke has been marked not only by the haunting absence of definitive evidence, but also by a series of controversies and procedural challenges that have raised difficult questions about how the case was handled. These issues range from delays in initiating certain investigative measures to disputes over the credibility of expert work and witness accounts. Over time, they have fueled frustration among the public, deepened the grief of Inga's family, and eroded confidence in the investigation's ability to reach a resolution. One of the most criticized aspects of the case is the delay in expanding the investigation to a full-scale criminal inquiry. In the crucial early hours following Inga's disappearance on May 2, 2015, the search was treated primarily as a missing person operation, focusing on the possibility that she had wandered off. It was not until approximately 36 hours later that the criminal police, Kriminalpolizei, became fully involved. By then, any crime scene, if one had existed, could have been compromised, and potentially valuable forensic evidence lost. In missing child cases, the first 24 hours are often described as the golden window for both locating the child and preserving critical clues. The lapse in initiating a parallel criminal investigation during that window has been widely seen as a missed opportunity. The environment in which the disappearance occurred added another layer of complexity to the investigative process. Wilhelmshof is a therapeutic community for individuals with addictions, mental illnesses, and, in some cases, criminal histories. While it is designed to be a supportive and rehabilitative space, the nature of its population posed significant challenges for investigators attempting to gather accurate witness statements. Many residents lived without the structure of clocks or precise timekeeping. Their days were marked instead by bells signaling meals or activities. This lack of precise temporal reference made it extremely difficult to establish a reliable timeline of events. Moreover, some residents' mental health conditions or cognitive impairments could affect memory, perception, and communication. In practical terms, this meant that witness accounts were often vague, inconsistent, or contradictory. A resident might recall seeing Inga before dinner or after coffee, but be unable to translate that into a specific time frame. Others might unintentionally misinterpret what they had seen or heard. In an investigation where minutes matter, these uncertainties compounded the difficulty of identifying suspects, verifying alibis, and narrowing down the sequence of events. Compounding these inherent challenges were questions about the quality and impartiality of some expert work conducted during the investigation. One notable controversy involved a psychologist who was commissioned to analyze aspects of the case, including interviewing witnesses It later emerged that she had a personal relationship with the lead investigator. They would eventually marry, raising concerns about potential conflicts of interest. Critics argued that her expertise did not align directly with the highly specialized field of criminal case analysis, and that her involvement might have influenced the direction or scope of the investigation. While no conclusive evidence has been presented that her work directly harmed the inquiry, the perception of compromised impartiality has lingered. Another contentious element was the use of a specific type of search dog operation known as car trailing. This method is based on the claim that dogs can follow scent trails left by individuals traveling in vehicles. In Inga's case, a private handler brought in to assist reported that her dogs had followed Inga's scent along complex routes, allegedly covering hundreds of kilometers, even into Austria. The scale of these trails and the time elapsed since Inga's disappearance drew skepticism from scent detection experts. Scientific consensus suggests that scent trails degrade rapidly, especially in outdoor conditions, and cannot be reliably tracked over such distances or after such long delays. Critics also noted that the car trailing results were inconsistent, with trails crossing and looping in ways that defied logical movement patterns. Further scrutiny revealed concerns about handler influence, where a dog's behavior may be unconsciously guided by cues from its handler rather than the scent itself. A police-commissioned expert in a separate case had previously concluded that this handler's methods were unreliable. Despite these doubts, the car trailing results were publicized at points in the investigation, raising false hopes for the family and potentially diverting resources away from more promising leads. The cumulative effect of these issues was a gradual erosion of confidence in the investigation. After 4 years of exhaustive but ultimately unproductive work, the case was formally closed in 2019, with police stating that all viable leads had been pursued without result. For Inga's family, this was a devastating blow. They argued that the closure was premature and that certain avenues, particularly those involving specific suspects, had not been fully explored. The decision also meant that the dedicated investigative team was disbanded, leaving any future progress dependent on sporadic reopenings or fresh tips. The credibility of information from indirect witnesses and social media has been another point of contention. Over the years, the case has attracted significant attention online, with amateur sleuths, discussion forums, and social media posts circulating theories and alleged sightings. While some tips have been well-intentioned, the sheer volume of unverified claims has made it difficult for investigators to separate potentially valuable leads from noise. In certain instances, misinformation has spread quickly, forcing the police to spend time and resources debunking false reports rather than pursuing substantive lines of inquiry. The public naming of suspects, particularly individuals like Christian B., has also had a significant psychological and social impact. On one hand, naming a suspect can encourage witnesses to come forward with relevant information. On the other, it risks prejudicing public opinion and affecting the lives of those named, especially if charges are never brought. For Inga's family, hearing about such suspects in the media has been a double-edged sword. Each announcement brings a surge of hope that the mystery might be closer to resolution, followed by disappointment when no arrest or concrete evidence follows. For the broader community, the unresolved nature of the case and the controversies surrounding its investigation have fostered a lingering sense of unease. Wilhelmshof, once seen as a place of healing and rehabilitation, became associated in the public mind with a baffling and troubling disappearance. The combination of a vulnerable setting, investigative delays, disputed expert contributions, and the closure of the case without resolution has left many feeling that justice has not been done. For Inga's family, the psychological toll has been immeasurable. Each procedural misstep, each questionable lead, and each closure of a potential avenue of inquiry represents not just an investigative failure, but a renewed wound in an already devastating loss. Their trust in official channels has been strained, yet they continue to advocate for renewed efforts, hoping that advances in forensic technology, new witnesses, or the re-examination of old evidence might finally bring answers. Nearly a decade after the disappearance of 5-year-old Inga Gehricke, the case remains one of Germany's most enduring and perplexing mysteries. But in 2023, there was a renewed push to re-examine the investigation with fresh eyes, new technology, and a determination to uncover any overlooked evidence. This reopening of the case brought a cautious sense of hope both to investigators and to a family that has spent 10 years living in the unbearable space between loss and uncertainty. The new investigative phase, which has extended into 2025, is being led by a team that explicitly set out to review every aspect of the original case file and re-explore key locations. One of their early actions was to return to Wilhelmshof and its surrounding areas, this time equipped with updated forensic tools. Advances in trace evidence collection, DNA analysis, and digital mapping since 2015 offered the possibility of extracting value from sites that had already been searched years before. Specialists carefully combed the grounds where Inga was last seen, along with nearby forested areas, looking for anything that might have been missed or that, with new methods, might now yield results. Items uncovered during these searches were cataloged, assessed for relevance, and sent for forensic examination. Although the police have not disclosed the specifics of what was collected, citing the sensitivity of the ongoing investigation, they have confirmed that the work was undertaken not to rehash old findings, but to actively seek new leads. The message was clear: nothing would be left unexamined. In parallel with the physical searches, investigators sought to engage the public in new ways. One of the most notable initiatives was the release of an age progression image of Inga. This digitally created image, produced by forensic artists, depicted what Inga might look like at around 15 years old. It was distributed on beverage bottles across the country for 1 month, a campaign designed to place her face in front of millions of people in everyday settings. The idea was to spark recognition, encourage conversations, and perhaps jog memories. The campaign had a tangible effect in terms of public response. Over 80 individuals came forward with tips or information they believed might be relevant to the case. These ranged from possible sightings to recollections of unusual events or people in the Wilhelmshof area around the time of the disappearance. Each was logged, assessed, and, where possible, followed up by investigators. While none of these leads has yet produced a breakthrough, the influx of information underscored a critical point. The public still cares about this case, and there remains a collective desire to see it solved. For Inga's family, the passage of 10 years has deepened the emotional complexity of their ordeal. Her mother, Victoria, has spoken about how the hope of finding her daughter has never entirely faded. For her, the absence of answers is a constant burden, but it also leaves open the possibility, however slim, that Inga could still be alive. This hope fuels her advocacy, her willingness to speak to the media, and her support for renewed investigative efforts. Her father, Jens Yu, has taken a somewhat different stance. While he too longs for resolution, he has expressed a wish for the truth above all else, even if that truth is painful. For him, knowing what happened, and having the certainty to grieve fully, is preferable to the indefinite limbo in which the family has existed since May 2015. His perspective reflects a reality many families of the missing face: the dual torment of wanting a loved one to be alive, but also needing closure to move forward. Both parents, despite differences in their emotional approaches, are united in their appeals to the public. They have called repeatedly for anyone with information, no matter how seemingly minor, to come forward. They stress that what might appear insignificant to one person could be the missing piece in a larger puzzle. Their appeals are often framed not only as a request for help in finding Inga, but also as a reminder of the human cost of silence. The case's revival has also reignited conversations in the broader community. In the towns and villages around Wilhelmshof, and in the national media, the question of what happened to Inga continues to generate debate. Was she taken by someone from within the facility? by an outsider with prior knowledge of the area? Did she wander off and meet with an accident? Or was she targeted by an organized network? Each theory remains on the table, and the absence of definitive evidence means none can be conclusively ruled out. This ambiguity is part of what gives the case its enduring power and its enduring pain. 10 years on, the questions remain as sharp as they were in the immediate aftermath. Where is Inga? Who was responsible for her disappearance? Could she have been saved if different choices had been made in those first hours and days? These are the unresolved threads that keep both investigators and the public engaged, even in the face of repeated disappointments. In their public statements, police have been careful not to overpromise. They have acknowledged that no major breakthroughs have yet emerged from the reopened investigation, but emphasize that the work is ongoing, and that even small advances in evidence collection or witness cooperation can eventually lead to larger revelations. They stress that cold cases can, and sometimes do, find resolution many years later, especially when advances in technology or changes in witness circumstances bring new information to light. For the family, the hope is that this will be one of those cases. They know that the odds grow longer with each passing year, but they also know that the possibility of answers remains. For them, the worst outcome is not discovering that Inga is gone. It is never discovering what happened at all. As the 10th anniversary of her disappearance passes, the calls for community involvement have only grown louder. Supporters and advocacy groups have joined the family in urging the public to share Inga's story, to examine their memories of that time, and to remain alert to any details, however delayed, that might emerge. They remind the public that justice and truth often depend on the courage of individuals to speak up, sometimes years after the fact. The conclusion of the case, whenever it comes, is likely to carry a mix of relief, grief, and reflection. Until then, Inga's name remains a symbol, both of the vulnerability of children and of the enduring determination of those who refuse to let a mystery fade into silence. Whether the answer lies buried in overlooked evidence, hidden in the memory of a witness, or locked in the conscience of someone who has remained silent, the commitment to finding it remains unbroken. For now, the case stands as an open chapter in Germany's criminal history, its ending unwritten. The investigation continues, the family waits, and the public watches, hoping that the next piece of information will be the one that finally reveals the truth about what happened to Inga Gehricke on that spring evening in 2015. And so the questions remain, carried forward year after year. Will this be the year the case is solved? Will the truth finally come to light? For those who follow the story, who care about the fate of a little girl who vanished in plain sight, the answer cannot come soon enough.